Miss Kirtley has 3 or 4 letters that he wrote back to his relatives, the original letters. They're very valuable, and they tell us something about the war. In the matter of missions, in 1815, a man named Luther Rice came into this area. He was from the East Coast, and he came soliciting mission support for foreign missionaries, notably Adoniram Judson and some others. And Absalom Graves became a very endeared friend of Luther Rice, and Luther Rice traveled throughout Kentucky soliciting mission gifts. The churches began sending offerings for missions, but this sort of stirred up some of the people, and some of them, and John Taylor included, wrote a short book on thoughts on missions where he says he was against these Easterners coming in here and getting our money. And this caused a lot of controversy. John Taylor never associated with the predestinarians, though, and I never see him referring to him. He was not against missions. He rode horseback and tells about the horse falling on top of him during the winter and how he thought he was going to die as it slid off of a trail. He was going to preach in a cabin when that happened. He was very interested in missions, but he was not interested in mission boards being located in the Far East, as they referred to it, up in Philadelphia and Boston and places like that. They didn't want their money to go up there, but they were interested in local missions. But Absalom Graves was very interested in that. The local leader of the predestinarians was a man named Lewis Connor. He actually had been a member. He came into the Bulletsburg Church during the Awakening in 1800. He was also a member at Middle Creek, at Mud Lick, and finally at Forks of Gunpowder, and he became their pastor, and he led that church into the predestinarian movement. There's a man named Thomas P. Dudley from the Lexington area who came up here from 1828 on and influenced a lot of these churches. And Miss Kirtley does not like T.P. Dudley at all. She let me know that. He should never have come up to this area. But he did influence these churches, and he led a lot of the churches in central Kentucky to become predestinarian. The terms that they used to describe themselves, they first called themselves particular Baptist, meaning they believed in a particular atonement. And then they started calling themselves predestinarian Baptist. They sometimes referred to themselves as old school Baptist. Then they called themselves primitive Baptist, and they were referred to that way. And finally, you hear the term hard shell sometimes. That's what that term means. It's sort of a derogatory term describing the predestinarian or primitive Baptist. And they came to the place where they did not believe the gospel needed to be preached, that God would work His own way, God would do His own will, God would save the elect without any means whatsoever, and so they never preached the gospel. And those churches, when you start seeing the history of them, especially Forks of Gunpowder, they go straight downhill. They never got any new converts. I think I was reading the minutes at Forks of Gunpowder. For 16 years, they had 3 additions to the church. And so they just died out. And that's what happened to all of them. There was also a Sardis Baptist Church in Union. Morris Lassing was the first prominent pastor there, and the building was built over behind where the telephone office and the veterinarian office is now, over across the creek. They died out just before the turn of this century. There was also a Mount Pleasant Baptist Church, and they came out of Bulletsburg and Sand Run, and they were in the village of Bulletsburg. When you see the old atlas of Boone County and the village of Bulletsburg, it says old school. Below it, it says Baptist Church, and some people have thought there was an old school there and there was a Baptist church there. No, it was the Old School Baptist Church. They didn't give the definite name, but it was Mount Pleasant. And the Gaines family was involved in leading in that. And Robert E. Kirtley and James Kirtley both discussed that. And Lewis Connor became their first pastor. He pastored Forks of Gunpowder and that church. And that church died out. I think it lasted till after the beginning of the 1900s. But Those churches died out, and the ones in central Kentucky did too, because they just never reached out to any converts at all, and they finally just sort of drew within themselves. I want to mention a few of the prominent people. We mentioned John Tanner. He was the first Baptist minister. Mr. and Mrs. Fitzgerald did an extensive study on him. She told me they had a whole cardboard box of stuff about John Tanner. He left here, he went to central Kentucky, to western Kentucky, and to Missouri, and they followed him through the courthouse records all the way down. If you want to do a study on John Tanner, see Ms. Fitzgerald. She's got all of the material. But John Taylor, a master's thesis has been written about John Taylor at Emory University. He's known as probably the outstanding preacher on the frontier of Kentucky. There are 5 major articles that have been written about him, either in church history books or in the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society. And he wrote extensively in Baptist churches. He wrote 2 short books besides this major book. They think this book might have sold for $1 when it first came out. He didn't copyright it or anything, and it was out of print for years and years, and finally in 1956 it was reprinted. A friend of mine gave this to me after I tried to trade him book after book after book with him. He finally said, okay, I'll give it to you. So I appreciated getting that. Absalom Graves compiled a songbook, and some of you were looking at this. I don't have his songbook, but I went to UK, and they have a copy down there. It's in leather. It's this size. It was printed in 1825, right after he died. He had compiled it. He said nobody in this county had songbooks. So he put his own money into it, and it's a beautiful light brown leather songbook, and it is called the Graves Hymnal, and there's an official title to it, Psalms and Hymns and Spiritual Songs is the official title. There's a biography of Absalom Graves in the back of it that is really wonderful. I thought about getting it copied and giving it to you. I will put it in the Boone County Library, and if you want to read that, it is really a touching, it's autobiographical, and then Robert Kirtley and a preacher who was a judge here, can't think of his name right now, starts with an H, but they finished the work up, and it really is a valuable piece of historical information. So this, when they had their hymns back then, there are no notes. They had CM for common meter, SM for short meter, LM for long meter. They had 3 tunes for about 500 songs. And they didn't have titles to any of them. We sing Amazing Grace. The reason it was named that is because that's the first 2 words in it. A lot of John Newton's songs are in here that wrote Amazing Grace. The tune, How Tedious and Tasteless the Hours, that became the title of the song. That's the first line of the song. There's beautiful poetry and wonderful theology in these songs, but you can imagine how the singing was. I remember reading about Meeting House Hill up in New England when they had those cold winters, and the dogs would follow them on the sleds and the horses to church, and they would sit out, they would lay out on the porch outside the church and try to keep warm while the people were trying to keep warm inside and have their services. And as they sang, the dogs joined in, you know how dogs do, and the dogs would all howl. And so here they were singing in the church, and you can imagine the dogs howling outside. So it was really a harmonious service, I guess we'd say. But everybody sort of sung their own tune. The leader did not have a tuning for it. He would sort of hum, this is common meter, and then they'd start singing. So Absalom Graves got the hymnal out for them. And that was a very valuable addition. Robert Kirtley was no doubt the most influential preacher in early Boone County. He was devastated at the predestinarian split. He felt like it was a personal affront upon him, and James recounts that as he writes about it. He thought it was a personal attack, and in the circular of 1841, he writes about this and how it affected him, and how this intruder from central Kentucky had come up to northern Kentucky and really violated the harmony of this area. So he takes it out against Thomas Dudley, and then the local leader as well, and he feels very, very personal about the whole thing. His 2 sons, James A. and Robert E., both became very influential preachers, very great preachers in this area. Moses Scott is another man who's very prominent. He never was a preacher. John Taylor is very pointed. He doesn't spare his opinions on most things. He said, Moses Scott would have been a preacher if he hadn't been so proud. He wanted Moses Scott to be a preacher, and Moses was the county surveyor. He was very faithful in the church. Actually, the churches had great respect for him. He wrote more circular letters than anyone else that was the author of circular letters. And to me, just being a deacon of the church, I think that speaks very highly of him. But he later, I think, became some kind of a elected official in the state. I think it was his grandson, his name was P.C. or Perry Anders C. Scott, a brilliant young man. He was pastor of Burlington Baptist Church for a while. He got blown up in that horrible boat mishap that happened down here at Warsaw. And he was still a very young man, but he went down there, it's either Warsaw or Carrollton, but he went down there to pastor, and he was either near that boat or on that boat when it exploded. And that was really a tragedy. There was a young man named James Dickon. We don't see much of him, but there is an obituary of him in the Bulletsburg Minutes, which was very rare. He was a young preacher who died possibly of a heart attack in his late 30s or early 40s. He died the same year Absalom Graves did, in 1825. And it was a man from the Campbell County area, Robinson, who also died that year. So they felt like there was really a great affliction upon the churches because these three very prominent people all died there that one year. Well, there's a lot more to tell. This is a little book. Mrs. Kirtley gave me this, and I really appreciate it. As far as I know, it's the only one that I've ever seen or heard of. It was The Design of Baptism, viewed in its doctrinal relations by James A. Kirtley, printed in 1873. Somehow she got it, and she gave it to me, and I have been very, very grateful for it. There are about 60 different authors referred to and footnoted in this book. So these people were not just shut in. They did read a lot. And he read English pastors and Eastern pastors and all of these men who were writing books. James Kirtley refers to them and refers to them many times. You can see that he read the Orthodox dominant authors of that day. And the fact that he had this book printed, and it was printed very nicely, it was gold stamping, and it sort of turned some pink. I don't know, it's got discolored somewhere before I got it. But it is a very, very valuable book. And I don't know of any. I've looked several places to see if I could locate it, and I haven't located it anywhere else. I began working on the early Baptists up until 1900. I started about 5 years ago, and I thought maybe I could get a book together in a couple of years. I kind of got sidetracked, and I just started uncovering so much stuff that you pick up a rock, and it's just like when you're hunting for fishing worms, they all start crawling out. And you find that that's the way it is with history. But there's a lot of work to be done, and I think if you can find something on the local history here, you ought to save it. Find someone who wants it, and try to preserve it, because I think it's very valuable unto us. A lot of the records are they're uneven. You can't talk about all the churches in the same way because you have more evidence from some than you do from others. And some of them are more careful in preserving their heritage. But this basically takes us up to about 1850. If in a few years we want to revisit the subject, maybe we could go from 1850 to 1900, but that's something to think about later. But I believe we have a lot to learn from our forefathers. And, Henry Ford said history is bunk. And some people have looked at history that way, but I think it's very valuable to us. And it sort of moors us. And we are very grateful for our forefathers, and very grateful that some have preserved some of the records for us. And so this is some of the things that we've uncovered. There's a lot more. We had to limit this, and I hope I I had a little more than I could get in here, and maybe I've talked like a Yankee tonight and talked a little bit too fast. I said to myself, slow it down when you get up there, but it seems like there's so much to cover. But does anyone have any questions or any comments that they would like to make? Yes?
You mentioned church dates, and you were saying, did you say that these dates are mostly when they joined the association, or was it a date?
No, these were Constitution dates.
Constitution dates.
Yeah, they generally joined the association of the year that they were founded. And the associations almost always met in August. So these dates would reflect that up till that year. It could have been the previous year if we don't have the church records. But if you date them by the association, they generally joined the next association after they were constituted. And so that's, sometimes we have to go by the association records because there aren't anything else. Yes?
In the early days, did the churches meet usually once a month and
yes,
meet for a whole weekend?
Yes. Because of the traveling constrictions, and most of them came either by horse or buggy, they had one service a month. They would generally have a Saturday night business meeting. And this is when they would take care of all the business of the church. If they needed to discipline, they would do that. If they needed to accept members, they would do that. And they would say the church is open, the doors of the church are open to receive members. And then a member would come before them and present themselves to the church. Then on Sunday, they had a preaching service, and it was a rather long preaching service. They came there, they got their money's worth. Sometimes it was 2 hours. But they'd ridden a long way and had a hard time getting there, and so they were rather, they would sing sometimes many songs. And these songs, some of them are 3 and 4 verses, some of them are 6 and 8 verses. So they had rather long services. Okay, any other questions? All right, folks have brought some wonderful stuff in here, and you view it and learn what you can from it. And I do appreciate this opportunity. I appreciate your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. A couple of things I would like to mention. As most of you know, we only meet 6 times a year, and our next meeting will be November the 15th. That's our closest meeting to the 60th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. So what we're going to do is we're going to have some different people from the county tell how that World War II affected their localities and the citizens. I'll tell you the people that we're going to have. We have Dorstina Idle, Buddy Grubbs, Katie Presnell, Carlton Anderson, and Jenny Baker. And I hope you all can come back, because I think that this will really be interesting, being it's told through their eyes. And a lot of the younger people, I've discussed things with them, and they just don't realize what the Second World War did, how it changed so many things, and things that people back here on the home front, what we went through. So I hope you all can come back in November, and I hope if you have anything that pertains to the Second World War, that you'll bring it and we can have it displayed like we have tonight. And so with that, I'm going to thank you and tell you that we have refreshments out in the hallway. Get you some refreshments. Come and look at all the things that the churches have brought, and I certainly appreciate you ones that have acted for your churches, bringing the things, and I know we're all going to enjoy it. And thank you very much.